Hello, and welcome to Jonathan Tobin Daily. I'm JNS Editor-in-Chief Jonathan Tobin. Thanks for joining me for another discussion on the most pressing issues in the Jewish world. Please like, subscribe, and give us good reviews when you listen to the show. Now let's get started. For the last year and a half, it has been a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those who have claimed that Hamas couldn't be defeated were right, but only because the rules of engagement of the war that the terrorists launched on October 7, 2023, were set up to ensure that it survived. Those rules may now be about to change, or at least they will if the Jewish state takes advantage of two factors that could alter the balance of power between Israel and the genocidal terrorists that seek to destroy it. The change in power in Washington and the shocking exploitation of the ceasefire deal on the part of Hamas that so outraged the Israeli public has given Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu an opportunity to reset that agreement in a way that could either free all the hostages or lead to Hamas's demise. The question is, does he have sufficient support from his own people to do it? That's the context for the announcement this past weekend that Israel was halting the entry of humanitarian goods and supplies into the Gaza Strip until Hamas agrees to the framework for a second phase deal along the lines proposed by the Trump administration. The goal is to set up a negotiation that would achieve at least one of Israel's two main war goals: freeing all of the remaining hostages taken by the Palestinians on October 7th and eradicating Hamas. The problem with those goals is that they are mutually exclusive. The only way to get all the hostages back is by assenting to an accord that will mean full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. In spite of the various plans being floated for what will happen in the Strip after the fighting truly ends, that means Hamas will emerge from the war not only alive, but still in control of its ruined fiefdom. At the same time, the only way to completely defeat Hamas, something difficult but not impossible, involves a decision on the part of Jerusalem that its war effort cannot be held hostage, along with the Israelis still held by the terrorists. This is glaringly obvious, though not being acknowledged by Trump or Netanyahu. Yet the aid cutoff is a sign that Israel's government is finally starting to act as if it's not committed to fighting Hamas with one hand tied behind its back. The Israel Defense Forces destroyed Hamas's organized military, killed much of its leadership, and demolished a sizable portion of its infrastructure, both above ground and in the hundreds of miles of tunnels it had built in the coastal enclave. But when a ceasefire hostage release deal halted the fighting in January, it was also clear that the Islamist group that had ruled Gaza as an independent Palestinian state in all but name since 2007 was far from eradicated. The constant admonitions of the Biden administration demanding that Israel avoid civilian casualties in Gaza, even if it meant letting the terrorists escape, was one part of the problem. Those warnings couldn't be entirely ignored because they were backed up by threats of halting the supply of vital arms shipments, as well as the slow walking of deliveries of those shipments that were allowed to be sent to Israel. The other was that even while it was fighting the Islamist group, in addition to its allies and collaborators, Israel was forced to do something unprecedented in the history of warfare, aiding the civilian population under the control of its enemies. Moreover, it did so while knowing that much of the food, fuel, and other supplies being shipped into Gaza daily were winding up in the hands of the very same group that started the war with unspeakable atrocities on October 7th. Despite being falsely accused of war crimes and even committing genocide in Gaza, the IDF conducted urban combat in a situation in which its foes deliberately tried to get its own people killed. They did this by fighting around and even underneath them in tunnels and bunkers under hospitals, schools, mosques, and civilian homes. Even when taking into account that the casualty statistics supplied by Hamas were wild exaggerations, roughly half the number of those killed in Gaza included Hamas and combatants of other terrorist groups. And more than that, when realizing that approximately 80% of the fatalities were Hamas members or their families, It's clear that the charges against the IDF were utter falsehoods. Nevertheless, the ability of Hamas to maintain its much diminished numbers is the result of pressure exerted on Israel by a Biden administration that was primarily interested in ending the war at any cost, even if it meant that the terrorists emerged triumphant. Just as important, the terms of the ceasefire hostage deal that President Joe Biden's foreign policy team crafted with their duplicitous Qatari partners seem to lead to that same outcome. And though President Donald Trump was opposed to Hamas's continued existence and threatened to unleash all hell on the region if all the hostages weren't released by his inauguration on January 20th, his desire to have the shooting stop in time for his swearing in led his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, to accept those terms as he pushed the deal over the goal line in the days before Trump 2.0 took power. That agreement did lead to the release of 30 hostages, but even as Israelis and every decent person celebrated their return home, their condition and the humiliating ceremonies that Hamas staged for their release, including a celebration when the bodies of the Bibas children were handed over, has also transformed the situation. Netanyahu is under enormous domestic pressure to try to ransom the remaining living hostages, which may number no more than 24. He has also been empowered by the outrage against Hamas, not simply to accept the same terms for a second phase of the ceasefire that would simply drag out the same process. That would further empower the terrorists and encourage them to believe that they can continue to hang on amid the ruins of a war they started. The aid stoppage represents a fundamental change in the way Israel is treating an enemy that makes no secret of its desire to destroy the Jewish state and commit the genocide of its population. It puts Hamas on notice that the gloves may soon be coming off in the war unless it stops playing for time. That has only been made possible by Trump's victory last November. Europe and much of the world still act as if Israel is the only country in the world not allowed to fight a war, to win a war forced on it. But unlike Biden, Trump isn't worried about international opinion about Gaza, nor is he constrained to avoid wholehearted support of the war on Hamas by a faction of his party, as Biden was by the left-wing base of the Democrats, where hostility to Israel has gone mainstream. Trump wants the hostages freed, but he's also floated a plan for not just ousting the terrorists, but resettling Gazans elsewhere and turning the Strip into a resort. If Israel chooses to resume the war, the only way to make that or any other post-war plan that is predicated on a non-Hamas government there, he won't protest or continue advocating for the fantasy of a destructive Palestinian state as Biden did. Indeed, it's likely that Trump will be cheering on an Israeli offensive. The next days and weeks will be something of a game of chicken as Hamas and Israel go right up to the brink of war, with both sides daring each other to take responsibility for blowing up the ceasefire talks. The question of which of them has more to lose from such an outcome is open for debate. Netanyahu can't let Hamas survive, but he also can't be seen as writing off the lives of any remaining living hostages. Hamas wants to hold on to the hostages because so long as they do, they think they are safe. But they also know an Israel unfettered by American pressure could mean their doom. Netanyahu now has far more weapons to pressure Hamas than he did before January. By having a partner in Washington who doesn't believe that Hamas is an idea that can't be defeated, but a terror group that can and should be eradicated, he can finally start waging a war on it in a way to accomplish that goal. Such a decision will bring down more opprobrium on Israel than before, and it will likely further fuel the surge of anti-Semitism spreading across the globe from those who believe that one Jewish state on the planet is one too many. But if anything is certain, it's that Hamas won't give up the remaining hostages unless it retains power and arms, and that is something that neither Israel nor the Trump administration should accept. It remains to be seen if Netanyahu can resist the pressure on him to throw away the sacrifices made by Israel's soldiers to secure the lives of the hostages. If he does, the primary reason won't be an American ally that doesn't think an evil terrorist organization should be allowed to get away with mass murder. Thanks for listening. Please remember to tune in every day for Jonathan Tobin Daily Edition and every week for Think Twice, my full-length JNS TV program. Whether you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any of the other podcast platforms, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at thinktwice@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself.